Blessy kind of mentioned the approach here, right? What do we do when we've lost? Next week's Holy Week, and we are going to begin on Sunday as a church thinking about Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem, and then everything turns against him over the course of the week. And so the question before us tonight is to look at what Jesus offers us and try to make sense of it in light of some of the themes we've been following so far about what makes a hero and what makes one holy. So to begin, kind of what was in the back of my mind beginning this talk was many, many years ago, I remember hearing somebody talk to me about the Jesus' miracle, the feeding of the 5,000. You may be familiar with it. There are actually several versions of this miracle throughout the Gospels, but effectively what's going on is Jesus is talking for a long time, and his audience is getting hungry. Kind of like, if you have class around noon, and it's a 75-minute class, and Dr. Starin just keeps talking. So the story goes is that the audience gets hungry, and Jesus asks his apostles to figure it out. They find a young boy who has a few loaves of bread, a couple of fish, and Jesus takes the bread and the fish, blesses it, gives thanks, passes it out, and there is not only enough food to feed the, depending on the numbers, 2,000, 5,000, whatever, large group of people, but there's food left over. You reading that miracle, looking at it on the surface, it seems like Jesus does something with conservation of mass and energy, and he pulls energy from nowhere and creates matter in front of us. Not only matter, but dead fish matter. And he feeds everybody through power. Somebody, and I don't know who first told me this, I'm sure various people out there have heard versions of this too. Somebody suggested to me, though, once a long time ago, that the real miracle here is not that Jesus was able to create matter from nothing, but that he, by his teaching and by his presence, was able to encourage the crowd to share the food that they all had with them, but didn't feel like sharing. So instead of everybody taking the little bits of bread and fish that this one boy had, they all shared and added to the collective pot. It's a nice sounding story. It's a nice sounding reinterpretation of the miracle. And I liked it for a while. And then somebody again down the line said, but doesn't this weaken Jesus' divinity? Are you uncomfortable, they asked me, with the idea that Jesus could, if he wanted to, make matter out of nothing? After all, that's what God did in creation, so shouldn't Jesus be able to do the same? So, that's in the back of my mind here, that question, as we approach this larger issue today about Jesus' power and what it means to fail. So, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to first review the last two talks that we've discussed, and then I'm going to kind of hopefully take us through three different questions. The first is, what's at stake to our faith in asking about Jesus' power? The second is, what are the Gospels doing when they narrate stories about Jesus' power? What's the function of them? Why are they included? What are the Gospels trying to do in general? And the third is then, what does Jesus show us about the nature of power? So, let's review what we've done the last couple weeks. We talked about the fact that the virtues of a hero include the willingness to put him or herself at risk for others. That a hero confronts powerful and dangerous forces. The hero goes above and beyond what's normally expected of us. And, at least in the Christian West, the hero does it for others and not for personal gain. So this is what we have as far as the themes of the hero. And looking at this list, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, this list kind of overlaps nicely with what we would expect of a saint as well. A holy woman or a man following God would also do these things. But is there a difference? One of the areas of difference that we kind of started talking about was the use of violence. That heroes, although often hesitant to use force, engage in force as a last resort. That their ability to win in the end has to do with their willingness to use their power. Power here being their ability to force others to their will. Now, a good hero, the will of a good hero is the common good, is in favor of saving people. It's Luke Skywalker saving the galaxy from the Empire. It's the Avengers defeating Thanos in a couple of weeks. Right? It's the ability to fight and force your desired outcome. But it's still a matter of a particular way of understanding force, of understanding power. And what a lot of this hinged on, as we talked about, a lot of the difference between what makes a hero's power virtuous and what makes a villain's power evil has to do with how they react on their worst day, when their back is against the wall. What it is that they fight for. And what it came down to, again, what we were discussing 2 weeks ago, is that for the heroes, it comes down to their willingness to bear the burden themselves. Not to pass off the responsibility to another, but to carry the weight themselves. We see this explicitly in the story of the Lord of the Rings, when Frodo's willingness to bear that ring all the way to Mordor. But it's a common theme. The hero does not pass off the buck. The buck stops with the hero, right? And so this kind of got into this question of, again, what are we fighting against? What are we fighting for? And whether or not that is the proper way to approach the distinction between the hero and the holy woman or man, the saint. Because for Christians, we're all called to be saints. Whether or not we're called to be heroes, we're called to be saints. Servant of God, Dorothy Day, founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, was insistent on this. She said, among many other things on this theme, that we're called to be saints, St. Paul says, and we might as well get over our bourgeois fear of the name. We might get used to recognizing the fact that there is some of the saint in all of us, in so much as we are growing, putting off the old and putting on Christ. There is some of the saint, the holy, the divine right here. And so if we're called to be saints, and if to be holy isn't somehow to follow in Jesus' footsteps, we have to ask then, what kind of use of power do we see in the person of Jesus, in the narratives of the gospel, so that we have a sense of how we ourselves go ahead and use power. Because, as we were reminded at the end of the talk 2 weeks ago, to be a witness, that is to be a witness to God, to the kingdom of heaven, to bear witness to the kingdom of heaven, does not consist in engaging in propaganda or stirring people up, or necessarily, I'm going to add this, defeating your enemies, but it being a living mystery. It means that to live in such a way that one's life would not make sense if God does not exist. So the question is, if God does exist, if Jesus does bear witness to who God is, what do we see in this image? What do we see in Jesus of God? So there's one kind of key distinction that we need to hold into our heads, hold in our heads here when it comes to power. Again, is the images that we usually associate with power have to do with our ability to bend others to our will. Whether that power is done through physical force, or whether that power is done through economic coercion, or whether it's done through religious coercion insisting on the power that is vested in the office. Whatever it is that you are holding on to, there is one particular notion of power here that's rooted in, I get to force you to do what I want. But interestingly enough, that's not the image that we see in the saints. The examples here of Martin Luther King and Teresa of Calcutta are certainly two of countless images we could pull up here. As far as images of people, of a woman and a man who exerted significant power, but a power that's not rooted in coercion or domination. Their power is of a different sort. And it's that different sort of power that I'm interested in looking at today. Come back. I'll skip some of these for now. Okay. So, I pulled this one up last time. This is a scene from season 3 of the Netflix Marvel series Daredevil. And there's a scene in this show where the character of Daredevil is recovering from trauma, from a traumatic defeat. And Karen Page, who is Daredevil's friend, is actually talking to Daredevil's parish priest about how to get Daredevil, his name's Matt Murdock, how to get him to get up off the mat, to keep going. And the question that Karen asks the priest in this scene is, what do you do when you realize you have lost? When the fight that you're fighting isn't going to turn out the way you want it to turn out? What's next? And so as I was watching this a couple months ago, as I was watching this season, she said this line and it jumped out at me, and I wrote it down and made notes of the episode and the moment in the episode, as a good academic does, right? Cite your sources well. And this line has haunted me. I don't really feel like getting into it at the moment, but I think we could recognize why this question of what do you do when you've lost? How do you keep going when you've lost? And so this is actually what I've been praying through this Lent. This line from a Marvel and Netflix co-produced story about a vigilante superhero who's blind and jumps off roofs. But the fact that this has stuck with me, the fact that this has been my prayer this Lent, I think goes to show the power of these stories. Where I could have gotten a nice little Lenten devotional and come across this line, and that might have worked out that way. But I was sitting in my house watching this on my computer, and this came up, and it jarred me. Because these things we don't expect this type of thing from our entertainment all the time. And when it comes, it shakes us. When it comes, this surprise that kind of hits us from a direction we're not necessarily anticipating, it has power to stay with us. So this is the question for us for tonight. What do you do when you realize you've lost? So, we'll come back to that. But to build up to that, the first question is whether Jesus had power. Or what kind of power Jesus had. Was Jesus a holy hero? Because after all, it certainly can seem that way. For anyone who has spent time, like I have, with stories of superheroes, Jesus as a superhero. In fact, actually, one of the more recent X-Men movies claimed that Jesus was one of the first mutants, and that his abilities were tied into the mutation of his DNA. But anyway, so let's look at that. This is the amusing part of the evening, right? So Jesus is fighting evil, right? We have this theme. This goes as long as we can think about. Jesus is fighting the devil, and he's going to win for us. It takes on all sorts of forms. There is a fascinating comic book. I would not recommend it. Called Jesus Christ Demon Slayer. which tells the story of Holy Saturday after Jesus has died, what he did during that time. Now, the long-standing tradition of the church is that after Jesus dies, before he rises on Easter Sunday, he actually descends into hell. And the language is the harrowing of hell, right? He frees the just and faithful people who are in hell and opens the doors for their entrance into heaven. Because, of course, salvation before Jesus is impossible. So, Jesus, though, goes to people like the Old Testament prophets and patriarchs and saints. Right? This is a long-standing tradition, the harrowing of hell. Well, Jesus Christ, demon slayer, takes it a little bit literally. They have Jesus, you talk about like muscular, this is like ripped Superman-type muscles on Jesus, with his flaming sword, probably the one he took that was guarding the Garden of Eden, but whatever. He takes his flaming sword, he descends into hell to crush the demons. That's the story. Again, don't buy it. There are better things to spend your money on, but this exists. These types of things exist. But we don't have to go there. We can look at more typical stories, right? Is weather control a superpower or a divine power? Right? Again, if you know anything about the superhero world, the control of the elements, in this picture, the X-Man Storm, seems very similar to the control of the weather that Jesus shows when he calms the storm. In fact, the images are not too terribly far either. You've got the one on the left, a storm controlling the weather, and then the one on the right, Jesus. Look at this. He's sticking his hand out. Why? Because the superpower he is exercising is shooting out of his hand to control this. Right? This is the image, this is the language we're used to, right? Someone with power reaching out with their hands and doing something, and so Jesus is shown this way too. It's not just weather control, though. Let's look at Jesus' other superpowers, right? So phasing through matter. On the right, you have an image of the Avenger known as the Vision, whose ability is to walk through walls, to control his density and walk through walls. In Jesus, interestingly enough, we're going to hear these stories in a couple weeks, the resurrection narratives, he's able to appear to the apostles when what? The doors and the windows are locked. Implying that Jesus can walk through walls. Right? Is this another one of Jesus' powers? The ability to show up in rooms when the doors are locked. Or what about teleportation, right? Because another resurrection narrative, the Emmaus story, has Jesus sitting at dinner with two apostles who do not know who he is until he breaks bread and says a blessing. This is all in Luke, we're going to hear this in a couple weeks. When Jesus does this, their eyes are open, they realize, oh, it's Jesus, he's resurrected, and then he vanishes from their sight. Jesus appears and vanishes a lot in the resurrection narratives. And so the question for us is, do the narratives, are they trying to tell us the same thing that perhaps a superhero would be able to do, right? He is now resurrected, and so Jesus has the ability to walk through walls and to teleport at will. That is one great glorified body. The resurrection itself, right? Is this another exercise of Jesus' power? Much like Gandalf's resurrection in The Lord of the Rings. In fact, the way that Gandalf is shown to be resurrected, the appearance of Gandalf visually takes the exact same cues from a lot of the images of Jesus' own resurrection. Right? The paintings, the drawings, the light that is shining like in a way that we can't quite make out what's going on. Sorry. We're further than I want to be. So, we can see these powers, right? Jesus has powers. He has powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. This isn't new, though. I'm sorry for those of you who have to sit through this on Thursday, too, for Christology. Because we're talking about this next slide a little bit in class on Thursday. But there is a 9th century epic poem. If anyone's read Beowulf, it reads like Beowulf. Right, called the Heliod. The Heliod from the 800s about Jesus, the great warrior chieftain, and his victory over death. The Hellion is right here. It's an account of the gospel, but told in a manner to convert Germanic barbarian tribes, warrior people. How do you convince a bunch of warriors to buy into the meek, passive, executed Jesus? Well, you rebrand him, right? You rebrand him as the great warrior. This image here is also from, it's not from the Hellion itself, but it's from a collection of the Psalms from the same time period of, now that is Jesus, right? There's a cruciform halo behind him. There's a cross, right? Jesus is the great warrior. He's dressed as a knight. He has a spear, and he's killing a dragon. So the same images we now see for things like St. Michael and St. George are here in the 9th century, attributed to Jesus. And just to give you a sense of how far back these images, this idea of Jesus and power goes, I'll just read a second about a short paragraph from "The mighty child of God and the good Peter walk on water." The people departed from places from all over the country. The great crowd scattered, since their Lord, the most powerful person, the ruler, had decided to go up into the mountains. They let the high-horned ship cut through the swift current, the bright waves, and the clear water. The light of day departed, and the sun went to its rest. Night wrapped the seafarers in fog. The earls daringly kept sailing on over the waters. The 4th hour of the night had come. Christ was guarding the wave riders, and the wind began to blow powerfully. A great storm arose, and the waves from the sea roared against the bow. The men fought to steer the boat into the wind, and their minds were in panic, and their emotions were filled with worries. Then they saw the ruler, Christ himself, walking on the sea, traveling on foot. He did not sink in the seawater because his own power was holding him up. The men's minds began to be fearful, as well as their emotions, and they were afraid that the great enemy might be doing this to them as a deception. Then their chieftain spoke to them, the Holy King of Heaven, and told them that he was the great and powerful Lord, that they should be steadfast and courageous, for Jesus, he will defend you against the sea and protect you with my power. So this idea that Jesus has power to control things is as old, it's going to go older, but it goes back at this point to the 9th century. But what about the Gospels? To push this even further, what do the Gospels show us about Jesus' power? The miracles. What kind of miracles? What's going on in the Gospels when Jesus performs these miracles? So we're going to answer that question with the question, what are the Gospels written to do? Right? If any of you guys are lit majors out there, anybody? Any lit majors? Yes, great one. You know the importance of genre in interpreting a story. Right, genre not only helps us classify, like when you do an Amazon search for what you're going to watch or whatever, you click on the genre, but it actually teaches us how to interpret what it is that we're reading, what it is that we're watching. As I often point out to my students, if you are watching a romantic comedy, and you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, there aren't enough aliens in this romantic comedy. There aren't enough explosions. The hero is not present enough. Right? If that's your critique of the romantic comedy, you're making a mistake when it comes to genre. Right? You're looking for something that's not supposed to be there. You're misinterpreting the genre. So what is the genre of the Gospels? What are they trying what is the point of the Gospels? To answer that question, I want to look briefly at the question of how language works. And to recognize that language serves lots of purposes, not the only one being to inform us of things. So, this is a scene from the show The Good Place. I don't know if any of you guys have watched it. But in a moment in this show, Jason, the character on the top there, looks at Janet and says, "I realize something. I love you." And her response is, "Okay." Now this is obviously this is a very clear, very helpful way of approaching this question, right? When someone says that they love you, are they informing you of something? Is that the point of such a statement? Right? I love you. Okay. Or the other example, and she's going to be embarrassed here in a second, but the other example that I typically use on this is when my wife, who's sitting in the front here, when my wife tells me that she's cold, my answer should not be, "Oh." Thank you for informing me of that fact. Right? No, that means I have to do something. Whether that's get her a blanket or get her a sweatshirt or raise the temperature or whatever it is, the point of her telling me that she's cold is that I'm supposed to do something. The point of someone telling you that they love you is not for you to say, "Thank you for that fascinating fact. I'll store it away. The sky's blue and it's a nice day outside too." Right? The point is to elicit a response. But that's how language works. Sometimes we're informed of things just straight up, but oftentimes language, especially language among people, the point is to bring about some sort of change in us. Right? Another example, this is just one of the greatest moments in cinematic history when Han Solo is about to be lowered into the carbonite and Empire Strikes Back, and Leia runs to him and she says, "I love you," and he says, "I know." Now that's a little bit different because that's a Han Solo way of saying "I love you" too. But that's great. That's not the goal here. The goal of the language of "I love you" is to evoke a response. So this is what the Gospels are doing. Right? The point of the Gospels, the stories about Jesus, are not just to tell us stuff that happened a long time ago. Right? We're not reading it as we would straight up history. That is not the genre of the Gospels. The Gospels were written, they were preserved, they are preached, not in order to simply inform us of something, but to bring about change, to bring about a response. So what were the Gospels written to do? They were written to introduce us to Jesus, who reveals to us who God is, and to invite us to live differently as a result of who God is. To be different, to live differently. So, in light of this, what does Jesus show to us about who God is? This is just an image by a contemporary artist by the name of Bruce Herman. Let's take for a second, let's think briefly about what does Jesus show us about who God is. Jesus came, as biblical scholars are very quick to point out, Jesus came to bear witness to the nearness, the proximity of the kingdom of God. But he does this not by pointing out, "Oh wait, look, the kingdom of God is close. It's like 300 yards down the street." Right? The proximity, the nearness of the kingdom of God's reign that Jesus has come to preach, involves the transformation of those people around him. Jesus' teachings, his parables, were all about the subversion of our expectations and the revelation that God doesn't work the way that we expect God to. Right? The parables over and over again assert this. One of the clearest examples of this is the parable of the Good Shepherd. God is the Good Shepherd who leaves the 99 sheep to go after the one lost one. Now, if you're a shepherd, would you think that it's a good and wise thing to leave your 99 sheep to go after the one? No, that's a poor shepherd. That's an imprudent shepherd. And so that should shake us up. If we were more familiar with shepherds, leaving the 99 to fend for themselves to go after the one, it should dawn on us that's an odd thing for God to do. Right? The parables function this way. They shake us up. They tell us that our expectations for what God wants or what God anticipates for us is not the same as what God actually does want. Jesus shows this again by the company he kept. I asked my son not long ago, if Jesus came to Wheeling, where would he be? This was a dinner table conversation. If Jesus came to Wheeling, who would he hang out with? Would he be at the chancery with the bishop? Would he be at the Highlands and Target? Would he be in the theology department of the Jesuit University? No, my son's response was actually that he would be either at the Catholic Charities Neighborhood Center or at the House of Regard Catholic Worker. Right? When that's where God goes, we have to begin to ask ourselves, why aren't we there? Why are we wrapping ourselves with other forms of comfort and other forms of security? So if Jesus' teaching was about God's way of doing things is not your way of doing things, and if Jesus' actions and the company he kept tell us that God's going to go to places and live in this world in a way that's very different from our own expectations, what do we do with the miracles? What do they show us about power? Well, first of all, we have to deal with a very strange passage from the Gospel of Mark. Jesus' inability to perform a miracle. Right? In the scene, Jesus is actually in his hometown, and he cannot, it says. He was unable to perform any mighty deed there, apart from curing a few sick people. I like how it's thrown in like that's nothing. But the point here is that Jesus didn't perform any miracles because he couldn't. And we have to begin to ask ourselves, what does it mean to say that Jesus couldn't? Right? If Jesus has power, if doing the miracles is just the exercising of his power, then this doesn't make sense. But this should make us think. This should make us ask, maybe the miracles actually are supposed to mean something else. Maybe the miracles have something to do with people's conversion, their transformation, their coming to God. Miracle workers were actually a dime a dozen in the New Testament days. That is the least unique thing about Jesus. The fact that he could perform miracles. I mean, let's be honest. If I performed a miracle right here, if I levitated or healed somebody or multiplied food and fed all you guys, it would be impressive. You would probably take a video of it and post it. Look, my professor is multiplying food in front of us. He's flying. But is that a revelation of God? Right? Is that enough? Whereas again, the point of Jesus' miracle is something else. We see a couple other scenes in the Gospels about Jesus' miracles, his power. The temptation in the desert, before Jesus began his public ministry. The Gospels tell us that Jesus was in the desert praying in preparation of his ministry, and Satan appears to him. Now, I've never been terribly impressed with Jesus being able to say no to Satan. If you knew, really, if you know Satan's like the one who's tempting you, it's like literally the devil. I think hopefully we'd all be able to say, no, not that. But anyway, Satan tempts Jesus. And what's the temptation? Use your power. Transform the stone into bread. Throw yourself off the summit of this building. The angels are going to catch you. Show your power. Make the world the way you want it to be. And Jesus responds to those temptations. No. That's not what's going on here. That's not what God is about. We have another version of this, right? Another, why doesn't Jesus do something? He's mocked on the cross. He's dying. He's hammered into wood. He's suffocating. He's probably in shock due to lack of blood. And he's dying, and the soldiers say he saved others, why can't he save himself? Why doesn't Jesus use his power? So what's the reason for the miracles? Well, the reason for the miracles is the same reason for Jesus' preaching, and it's the same reason for Jesus' activity. It's to bear witness to the kingdom of God. The Gospels actually make this fairly explicit when Jesus basically sets out the mission statement for his work in Luke 4. This is the beginning of Jesus' public ministry in Luke. And it has him going to the synagogue and reading from the prophet Isaiah. Jesus can read anything he wants. He pulls this and he proclaims this. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to captives, the recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord. Right? This is his mission statement. This is his goal. This is the summary of why he came. So his teaching reflects this. The company he keeps reflects this. And yes, the point of the miracles, what the miracles are intended to teach us about Jesus, is this. The healing miracles are not primarily about Jesus' ability to overcome sickness. Again, healers were a dime a dozen in the New Testament era. There was nothing unique about Jesus' healing except who it was he healed and why. Jesus went to the outcasts. He went to the people who were not part of the accepted society. He went to those people whose sickness caused them to be marginalized. Right? He went to lepers, people who had to be on the outside of society, and said, no, you are no longer on the outside, you're back in. Right? The miracles are, the healing miracles serve to bring people who are out back into the kingdom. So the point of this is not to show Jesus' power over creation. What's unique about Jesus in the Gospels is how that power is used. Why? What's the point of these stories? So perhaps, like everything else Jesus said and did, his miracles were not primarily revelations of his power, but of healing, of peace, of inclusion, of overcoming systems of injustice that kept people out, kept people in pain, kept people hurt. Jesus worked to undermine those. Now I want to go back to this question that I had at the beginning about the healing, the feeding miracle. And whether the conversion of the hearts of the people in the crowd is enough for us. Is that divine enough? Do we want Jesus to be playing with the atoms and creating molecules from thin air and creating dead fish just to feed us? Or can we recognize the perhaps more significant miracle of turning the hearts of those in the crowd? Because I know in my case, I would be much more impressed with a God who turned my heart than a God who could make fish out of thin air. Right? Making fish out of thin air sounds like a parlor trick compared to turning my heart. What are we waiting for? Why is this idea of a conversion of our hearts not enough? We have to be careful. We looked at the beginning at the ways in which Jesus' superpowers can be blurred and make him look like a superhero in comparison to the heroes in our world. We looked at the Hellion, and in the 9th century, people wanted Jesus to show power, and he said, no, this is not what I'm here to do. The same thing happens in the Gospels. When we call Jesus the Christ, right, it's not his last name. Christ is Greek for the anointed one. For the Messiah. That's the Hebrew word. Messiah and Christ are synonyms. Or translate, same word, two different languages. Greek and Hebrew. To call Jesus the Christ is to call him the Messiah. But when Jesus was walking around and people started speculating, is this the Messiah? The crowds who followed him, what were they expecting? What did they want? What did they anticipate the Messiah was going to bring? They wanted somebody to get rid of the occupying Roman Empire by force and to reestablish the kingdom. They wanted somebody to get rid of the oppressive, unjust rulers and to fix things. To reestablish a kingdom according to Jewish rules, not Roman. When it became clear that Jesus wasn't going to do that, the crowd turned on him. Because the Messiah that Jesus came to be wasn't the Messiah that they wanted. They wanted the Messiah who was going to use his power to exert a force upon the situation and to force everyone to comply. So, within ourselves, when we're hearing these stories about Jesus focusing on these bringing glad tidings to the poor and proclaiming liberty to captives and giving sight to the blind and letting the oppressed go free. And we say, yeah, but there was also all that power. We're doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing the people did who were following him 2,000 years ago. They wanted a Messiah who was going to use his force bend the world to his will. And Jesus said no. That's not what God's power does. So was Jesus a failed hero? He was defeated, he was beaten, he was humiliated. He couldn't walk any further. He collapsed under the weight of the cross. He was given many chances to back down. All he had to say to Caiaphas, to the high priest, to Pilate, was, oh, no, you got the wrong guy, sorry. All that stuff I said, my bad. I changed my mind. He didn't. And he was killed. Brutally. Quasi-legal. There's questions about the legality of the Jewish trial, but that's certainly legally according to the empire. So what does it mean to fail as a hero? One of the clearest examples we have about this in heroic literature is actually Frodo Baggins from Lord of the Rings. Frodo fails in two ways. He's unable to carry the ring up Mount Doom to destroy it. He literally collapses and cannot bring himself to go any further. And his friend Sam has to carry him the rest of the way. Now that's not a moral failure, that his body was defeated. But it's certainly a heroic failure. He can't just get that last forceful effort to make it the rest of the way. But Frodo fails at a moral level too. Right, the last scene when he's able to throw the ring into the fire and finally destroy the source of evil in the world, he decides not to. He gives in to the temptation of power and says, no, I am going to claim this power as mine. He's saved through another means. The good guys win. Yay. But not because Frodo, in the end, is successful. Not because of his force. Not because of his ability to impose his will on the situation. So there are theological implications here. If Jesus is supposed to tell us who God is, and this is what Jesus shows us about power, then what we see God's power is shown most clearly in Jesus. When? Is the clearest picture we get of God when Jesus creates bread and fish out of nowhere, or walks on the back of the waters, or whatever. Or do we have a different image of power altogether? A holy image of power, a power that's tied to the responsibility of responding to the needs of the situation. Because Jesus certainly failed to win, at least by any heroic standards. Jesus lost. He had a mission, and he was killed. He didn't overcome those who arrested him. He didn't overthrow the Roman Empire. He certainly failed, in a sense, to win the day. But what battle was he fighting? What power was he using? I want to propose the idea that what Jesus shows us about God's power is that what power truly means is to be able to stay focused on the mission of loving mercy, on the kingdom of God that brings people in, that heals the wounded. That power is the ability to stay committed to that no matter what. That's what Jesus is showing us. Right? The power that turns our hearts and says, yeah, you know what? The circumstances are collapsing around me. The context is collapsing around me. I can't force things to work out the way I want to. But you know what? I can stay focused on what is most important here. And that is the healing of the wounded, the giving sight to the blind, the incorporation of the outcasts back in. And that losing the immediate battle does not mean losing one's mission. Jesus was not kept from completing his mission. Because his power isn't tied to victory over the immediate circumstances of his situation. His power isn't primarily shown in his ability to force creation to bend to his will. The clearest revelation of divinity, what is most divine in Jesus, is his power to stay loving and merciful until the end, no matter what. Karl Barth, probably the most significant Protestant theologian of the 20th century, in his commentary on Paul's epistle to the Romans, commented that love does not enter into competition and therefore it cannot be defeated. What Barth means by not entering into competition is that whether or not Jesus commits himself to love is not a matter of fighting these immediate contexts and the situations that's in front of him. Right? Love is not threatened. The ability to love is not threatened by even the threats to his life. But love instead bears all things, right? It bears his going forward. Another way of thinking about this is that you cannot bear witness to merciful love if you depend on things working out. If you depend on things working out, you depend on force working within this broken world to bend things according to our will. And what we see on the cross is a witness to love that is not dependent on things working out. So is this enough for us? This notion of power that's rooted in the ability to love. If you're like me, there's part of you that still wants the forceful rearranging of the circumstances of our world. Still wants this Jesus who's a Messiah who's going to come force the powers that be to be just. It's going to force people to be included. But that's not the Messiah that Jesus shows us. That's not who Instead, we have a Jesus who stays firmly planted in his devotion to God. This is Greg Boyle, a Jesuit priest who's involved in gang rehabilitation in Los Angeles, in his book Tattoos on the Heart, writes that the strategy of Jesus is not centered on taking the right stand on issues, but standing in the right place, with the outcasts and those relegated to the margins. We can include here those who are sick,